Good morning.
Good morning.
Raise your hand if you consider yourself an extrovert. Okay? Now raise your hand if you consider yourself an introvert. Now, like Maureen said to me, or said to you, 25% of the population used to be considered extroverts. Now with new research, that number has actually been bumped a little bit, closer to 50%. At least a third to 50% of the population is considered some form of an introvert. That's a big jump, and it's a big part of our population. Now, if you were to pull out your Merriam-Webster dictionary, you would find that the definition of an introvert is someone who is wholly and intentionally interested in one's own mental life. An extrovert is someone who is exactly the opposite, interested in someone else's, others' social contact's mental life. Now that makes introverts seem pretty selfish, and it makes extroverts seem pretty selfless. I seem to take a little bit of a different view. Many of you in this room have probably taken various personality tests, either through school or through work, or maybe you just were curious and you wanted to find out if you were an introvert or an extrovert. I had to take quite a few of those. I've taken 3 or 4 while I was in college, and at Ryan Lawn and Tree, we are required as an employment screening to take the culture index test. Now, each and every time I took that test, the results came back the same. I'm an introvert. And I wasn't just kind of an introvert, I actually fell pretty far down on the scale. I say down on the scale. Well, I at first always kind of had a bad feeling about that. I felt like it didn't fit in. It wasn't viewed as a positive thing, especially on a screening thing where I was looking for a marketing job, and eventually would move into a sales position. I didn't really think those things that being an introvert was a positive thing. It always carried a negative connotation for me. Well, that all changed after I luckily got my job, and a coworker gave me a book called Quiet: The Power of Introverts in a World That Just Can't Seem to Stop Talking. The author of the book is Susan Cain. Now, if you're doing research on introverts and extroverts, Susan Cain is everywhere. You can't really look on Google and not see her name somewhere. In fact, she talks about how the 7 years she spent writing the book, Quiet, she loved her time doing it. She loved the research, she loved working by herself, thinking introspectively, and doing research. This past year, she spent touring the country, giving speeches. In fact, she calls it her year of speaking dangerously. She talks about her fear of public speaking, and she actually has a TED Talk for anyone who's interested in looking at it. Now, Susan has a different definition of what being an introvert means. She says it's someone who gains energy from within, and extroverts are people who gain energy outwards. The main premise of the book is that our culture is biased against introverts. She says that, and I completely agree with her after reading more, listening to her research and others, that our culture values things like teamwork, like group brainstorming. When we have introverts, we tell them to be more like extroverts. We tell them to be assertive instead of really taking advantage of their serious, reflective, soft-spoken nature. This is especially true in the way a lot of cultures are now pushing team environments. You'll see a lot of times people work in an open environment where all the desks are pushed together, especially in schools. I know I grew up in a school where we worked in pods, and we never really had time to be by ourselves. Yes, this is great for extroverts. They have time to talk to others, it helps build their energy, and ideas can flow freely. But let's not lose that old thought of a cubicle. Sometimes it's a good thing. I personally prefer to work in an office or a cubicle. I feel like that's a place where I can think introspectively, think on my own, and then come together in a group when it's time to talk. Now, I'm not saying all ideas, in no way that companies can function when working in a vacuum. People cannot work by themselves and never communicate with others. That will never work. But what I am saying is that we need to value each and every different person's way of thinking, and we need to understand exactly how each person is going to function most effectively for the team. Susan Cain would say each person has their own way of working, and we need to understand exactly how to meet the needs of introverts and extroverts. Like I said, the Myers-Briggs definition of an introvert is someone who gains energy from within, and the definition of an extrovert is someone who gains energy outwards. This means that, so if I go to a networking event, I'm going to constantly be losing energy. And if I were to go meet with an extrovert, they're going to be constantly gaining energy from the people around them. By the end of the meeting, they're going to have more energy than when they showed up in the very beginning. That's an interesting thought. Maybe my values, maybe I'm not very, I might not be very valuable in a networking setting like this. However, an extrovert would be very good in this setting. But I could also be good in a research setting, all valuable for a company or an organization, anything like that. Carl Jung once said, "There's no such thing as a pure introvert or a pure extrovert. Such a person would be locked up in an insane asylum." Everyone falls somewhere on the scale. Now, what can you do with this information? If you're a manager, make sure you understand how each one of your employees functions. If you're an extrovert, make sure you understand and don't have preconceived notions about people who like to work by themselves. Same thing goes for introverts. Don't be selfish. Don't live up to that stereotype. Understand that the extroverts in the room, they need that social interaction just as much as you need that time by yourself. If we can all learn to understand each other's beliefs, how we all function in a natural setting, we'll all be more productive and enjoy our lives on a daily basis.